Hi, my name is Greg Niemeyer, and I'm Professor for Media Innovation at the Department of Art Practice at UC Berkeley. Together with my esteemed colleague, Professor Shannon Jackson, I'm teaching a course on video art here at BAMPFA, which is funded by a generous grant from the Kramlich Foundation. The grant allows us to make the course public, both here in person today and online, and I want to thank the BAMPFA staff and director for their support in enabling this public access. You can find all our talks from this series and previous series on YouTube if you search for UC Berkeley Arts and Design. So this is a public presentation, but also a course. And for those of us who are here for the course, I want to say that we are giving you an extension for your video project till April 21st, which means that you have all the more time to integrate what you're learning today, and so that's what you're supposed to do. I'm thrilled today to introduce our guest speaker, Danielle Dean. I used to rely on ChatGPT to help me write introductions, but it didn't go so well. I found that ChatGPT, yes, even the latest version, does the opposite of what art does. Let me explain. ChatGPT tries to find general and generic solutions to specific problems. So when I have a request like write me an introduction, that's a specific problem, and it comes up with a general solution. However, art does the opposite. It generally speaking, art is an activity that we do where we have a general solution and we try to find a specific problem. That sounds a little weird, but if you think about it, we go from a general solution, which is the world we all live in, as we find it, to a specific problem, which is how to make sense of it, and how to make sense of that world in our specific lives. And so when we do that, we come up with very specific problems that end up being the bonding point where we can connect with each other's lives through art, and that is something we can do without GTP. Thank you very much. That being said, I want to introduce our speaker today as a true master of intertextuality, or as we recently discussed, subversive appropriation, weaving together in stunning detail the languages of advertising and the global trauma of industrialization. Danielle Dean's artwork takes us on surreal journeys into the subconscious substrate where some people's ideals and other people's realities intersect. And since I mentioned intersectional, I also want to mention that Danielle Dean draws from many media traditions, specifically advertising. And advertising, of course, has its own history. And this is a slide that we looked at earlier where we talked about the timelines of media history from the first black and white television to the first color television to the first internet, which came in the form of a milk cart connected to another network with a radio connection. And of course, the iPhone. And then 2023, the present day, which is the moment of deep intertextuality. It doesn't end with Super Smash Brothers. It goes way beyond that. It goes to exactly the work that Danielle Dean will be presenting, and that's why we have a picture of one of Danielle Dean's fabulous paintings and installations at the end there where it says 2023. And that's that picture. And here's a more detailed text about Danielle Dean's biography. I just want to point out that Danielle has a deep background in the arts, and usually when we see Whitney Biennial 2022, that means that Danielle Dean has been anointed as one of the most relevant artists of the United States. And not only that, but that show was particularly compelling, and many people wrote about Danielle's work there and were very moved and impressed by it. So as an African and an American and a Briton and a woman, Dean tends to the delusions and the pains of the intersections between all these identities which polarize across gender and race. She tends to these intersections with the radical care of an unwavering observer, throwing us back into nostalgic illusions and shaking us awake to a burning world at the same time. As our colleague and guest speaker, Kavena Hambira, recently wrote, its significance notwithstanding, truthfully, hope is not a strategy. What we require are spaces for artists to make work that reimagines a future where we all are free. Danielle Dean makes that work. Please join me in welcoming Danielle Dean. And while I'm switching my video here, which will just take a second. I just want to mention that Danielle Dean's presentation will include some images of nudity and shouting and some racist imagery, although not at the same time. So just wanted to introduce that as a up ahead kind of thing. And I think we're all good to go here.
Okay,
thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, I think it... Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Greg, for the invitation to talk. Okay, so as has been explained by Greg, my work is really interdisciplinary. I work with video, drawing, sculpture, and something like a type of social practice or experimental ethnography. So I'm going to show some works, not all of the work that I've produced, but I'm going to highlight some pieces that look into how I work with archival material and also collaborate the research and the ways in which I think about the work with other people in my practice. I'm also going to show some installation video pieces. I wanted to just say that research does really influence the outcome of my work, so I don't always know what medium I'm going to use, hence why it ends up being very multidisciplinary. Okay, so I'm driven by my interest in how the subject is constructed in relation to capitalism, how our behavior, language, relationships, even our personality are interpolated, so brought out by things like advertising. Race, age, gender are not essential, are not primarily biological, but markers that have been historically determined and have been defined and articulated in relation to consumer products. Ideology is a key term that I think a lot about, whereby material relations generate ideas, beliefs, and values that become embedded in representation, creating dominant ideologies or what we call like common sense views of the world, which, become a kind of norm. This is not just about class status, but also the construction of race and gender. Racist ideologies are represented in media and affect how we are perceived and how we perceive ourselves, generating schizophrenic perceptions, as Frantz Fanon famously described it. These representations circulate in the form of media and commodities around the globe. And this is an example of an archive image that I was looking at. I looked at an archive of cigarette commercials, and you can see that it uses race as a kind of way of selling these cigarettes. I started to think about how capitalist ideology is also about colonialism, not only because of the material network of raw materials from the colonies, goods, and advertising which circulates globally, but also because of how it operates within a power structure, whereby advertisements are normally centered on white ideals. When you're defined by colonial representation, this can produce an inferiority complex in the mind of the other, and for Fanon, this was the problem faced by the black subject. W.E. Du Bois states that the oppressed are doomed to see themselves through the eyes of the oppressor. So I look through archives to see how history has influenced or had an influence on our racialized capitalists present. So this is a video still from a really early work called No Lie from 2011. And this was one of the first pieces that I developed actually in art school, where I used performance to reenact and reinterpret archives of advertising. The piece uses advertising copy from ads found in magazines such as Ebony, Essence, Vanity Fair, and Vogue, which all have particular target audiences based on race. The archive started in 1946 and extended all the way to the present. And the piece is called No Lie. So the lie part is spelled Lye, which is a slogan that I found in an early advert, which basically it's lye is a type of bleach that was used in products such as skin lightening creams or hair relaxing creams. And this slogan was, basically saying that there's no longer this chemical in it, no lie. I really enjoyed the sort of slippage between this being like advertising doesn't lie apparently, and also that it actually has a material chemical that or presence in the products that also can be harmful. So 5 women, including myself, performed the script in a bathroom. We followed a Brechtian method where we created an intentional gap between the words that were said and a kind of soap opera inspired drama performance, bearing in mind that some of us also couldn't act or have like myself, I'm not really an actor, but I give it a go. Words, language, and sound were literally floating inside of the bathroom, like what Stuart Hall calls floating signifiers. For Stuart Hall, race is a signifier that is relational and not biological, but something embedded in language, and therefore something that is not essential and not fixed. I thought if I could rearrange advertising copy and play with its delivery, that perhaps new meanings could arise. So the other part of it is that this soap opera-like performance was really interesting to me, partly because I grew up watching soap operas. In the UK, there's a soap opera called EastEnders, which I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's still going. And I was there in England last week catching up on all of the storylines. Serialized soap operas actually begun as a form of advertising. They were created by soap companies in the early 20th century to market cleaning products to a feminine audience. They were a lot about teaching people how to become consumers, which is, I suppose, hard for us to think about, but there was a time in history where it was like we had to really be taught how to, consume things that we might not necessarily need. How to integrate the products into our emotional lives, but also how to orient oneself to normative gender roles. Language is often in direct reference to a product as a metaphor for emotion. So the script for the video work assembled this copy together with political speech about immigration. I wanted to subvert the notion of individually beautifying oneself alone in the bathroom, and the focus was instead on a kind of collective subversion of these chemicals or these words that were intended to make us feel bad about ourselves or to make us feel like we need to use these products in order to improve ourselves. The words spoken were harsh and cruel about the boundaries of skin and immigration border control, both based on self-preservation, borders, and racist rhetoric. So the narrative implies that the women are engaged in making a bomb. And just a side note that I did actually figure out that a lot of the chemicals that are found in these products could be used to make a bomb in reality, with an inclusion of maybe a few other stuff, but there is some interesting correlation. Anyway, so these women are persuading each other to work collectively, drawing on rhetorical connections between the beauty industry and immigration policy discourses. The piece subverts these rhetorics into a suggestion of material revolution, playing with the duality of difference and solidarity. The script slips between disgust and affection as they work together to make a bomb.
Zoe, snap, 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 back, snap, 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 back.
We are facing the dangers of the future. Please do not sit on the fence.
Okay, so that's just a really short clip, and like I realize this is like over 10 years old now, which is crazy, and so the sound is not so good. Okay, so I will jump a few projects ahead to 2014. So in that time between making No Lie and this piece, I made other works, but there's not time to show everything. But this piece is called Trainers and uses an archive of Nike commercials from 1988 to 2014, combined with archival speeches about civil rights. And an aside note, trainers is the British word for sneakers. In the video, women are training within the confines of an abstract and oppressive set, but what they are training for isn't exactly clear. The script is ambiguous about specific goals of training, variously suggesting that they are training to become themselves or revolutionaries or neoliberal consumers. I continued to think about solidarity and revolution, which were themes that came up in the piece I just showed, No Lie, but this time I focused more explicitly on capitalist co-option and appropriation of radical and revolutionary discourses, which Nike did a lot, basically, appropriating from feminist slogans at the time or political speeches by revolutionaries. I developed the piece through a number of women through a series of workshops. Copy and camera angles from the Nike archive were pinned all over the walls. And also one of the participants of this piece is my sister Astress, who is sitting in the middle of the floor in this video still. So here are some examples of adverts I was looking at. These are video stills from various TV commercials, Nike TV commercials. What I found was that Nike appropriates and empties out politics and creates an illusion of collectivity. Individualism and competition are often celebrated, which are ideal subjects for subjectivities for capitalism. Some adverts included violent language. For example, there was an early advert from 1988 which really stuck out to me, but it was this woman addressing the camera, therefore addressing us watching it, and says it wouldn't hurt to stop eating like a pig either. This is a video still from a 90s Nike commercial by Spike Lee, and it's the Urban Jungle Gym. And it's kind of interesting because I think that it's using colors and patterns to suggest the discourse of multiculturalism, which was quite a thing at the time. I was thinking about multiculturalism as a form of co-option where diversity was being recognized at a superficial level, through colors and patterns and symbols. And it kind of was, covering over the fact that at the time in the 90s, there was a mass rise of mass incarceration and no reparations or serious progressive social change. So the set that I made for this video was thinking about all of these things and alludes to this liberal co-option of difference through aesthetics. It also was looking generally at the Nike sneakers designs, but it was also alluding to the history of revolutionary abstraction such as Russian constructivism. And then in the piece, so the whole piece was shot inside of this set, and it uses camera angles that also came from the adverts to create cognitive associations.
My dad said I couldn't be a boxer. mean, nobody owns us. You understand? Nobody can own.
They form the golden chains of condition.
Your hydrogen fights with your oxygen.
But nobody owns us, man. When I say nobody, I mean nobody. Do you understand? Nobody can own.
My daddy hardly ever missed a day of work.
Free 5.0 plus.
The revolution will not begin with a laser show or a mascot or some sort of small trampoline.
So I'm not going to show this piece, but I just mentioned that I also made other works to do with Nike at the time. This piece is called A Portrait of True Red, and it's about these red Nike sneakers that were released in the early 2000s that were called True Red, the vampire sneaker. And I used similar method to the other two pieces I've shown so far. So it was like an assemblage script using Nike copy, but also thinking about how a vampire, basically the character was a type of vampire as a political agent, because I was looking at the ways in which vampires have manifested themselves in different stories narratively. Okay, so at this point, I want to focus on how I was thinking through the limit of the types of work I was making before. And I was like, oh, there's something about this work that wasn't so much about our reality that we live in, although it was, but I just felt like there was something a bit missing. And I wanted to connect more to the real, both in terms of materiality, but also the people. So the performers that I was working with, they were real people, but the work itself didn't really engage in that as such. It was using them more as abstractions. So instead of focusing so much on ideas, culture, language as pure abstractions, I became interested in other theories such as German media theory, which studies the ways in which technologies and materials shape how we perceive and understand the world. So, for example, just taking this book display, it's like how a particular window design seen on this book cover articulates a particular way of relating the inside to the outside. Language itself is a type of window. So one of the first projects in which I explored cultural techniques was a piece called True Red Ruin, Elmina Castle, which did come out of the projects that I did with Nike, hence why it's also titled in the similar way. But this time, this piece combines historical research with a type of social practice. So this work is based on research into Elmina Castle, which was built in 1482 off the coast of Ghana. Elmina was a military building to store and protect gold that was mined in Ghana, but later became the largest slave prison of its time and helped expand the transatlantic slave trade. It was an early flat pack castle, so essentially it was prefabricated. Parts of it were prefabricated in Portugal and then brought on a ship to Ghana by the Portuguese. I was thinking about the colonial castle or fort as a type of cultural technique that was transported from Portugal. This is an etching of Elmina seen from the sea, made in 1668. During my research, I was imagining what it would have been like to have that castle imposed on your community. One historical account I found stated that the castle was built on an ancient burial ground, and the local people of Elmina stormed the castle to protest this. I was interested in how capitalism is not just about economic exploitation, but also about loss of culture and other metaphysical systems through slavery. The design of the castle had towers in each corner, watching over the local inhabitants and acting like a sort of panopticon. I mean, originally, this medieval castle would have been about watching the sea. That was what those towers were meant for. But they would have they absolutely would have also watched the people who they felt were also a threat within on land. According to Foucault, this constant sense of being watched, but not actually seeing who is watching you, would have had a psychological effect on the inhabitants. This history is also racial. The book Dark Matters by Simone Brown, who is here talking today, actually, not in Berkeley, but at Stanford. So, for example, talks about the connection between the history of slavery, the technologies used to maintain property of Black bodies under slavery in relation to police violence now in our current context. So, but more than just a singular site of control, Elmina Castle became a model for many other castles along the coast. So you can see this shows how this castle, how these castles were built along the coast. For the German media theorist Friedrich Kittler, all media are systems of storage, processing, and transmission of information. The castle could store not only goods and people, but also the technology or cultural technique to produce not only more castles, but subjects that were suitable for the castle to reproduce its cultural logic. Because the castle also acted as a storage device, storing gold and then slaves, there were also accounts of bookkeeping and stocktake. I was thinking about the castle as a form of media, like a cell phone or a hard drive, and how some of the logics of the castle, including surveillance and social control, for example, continued to be factors in certain populations, in regards to housing and police. True Red Ruin considers these connections of the past to the present, and what basically we did was use a cell phone and the historical events that happened with this castle, and reenacted it as if it was happening now. Me, my sister, and her friends performed parts of this history based on historical accounts of Elmina. For example, the locals were forced to pay taxes to have this castle built in their village. And then the castle became, so essentially I made the castle as a standee that was also placed in my sister's community in Houston, Texas, is where it was shot, in Third Ward in Houston, Texas. And so I also was thinking about this standee as a common technology of branding displays that happened to also be flat pack. And so I thought it was an interesting connection between the original castle and a way of thinking about how things circulate materially now through marketing, and how these things are easily sent around the world. And then also so essentially also all the other props that were used in this video came from the archival material. So what you can see behind me is like a bit like a selfie backdrop or whatever, but it was drawn from an archival material which showed how the castle was built there. But essentially, so this is another example of that. I kind of redrew all of these maps and displays of the castle, but took the castle out and left the landscape or the sea. And then these became these backdrops or banners that were used in the video. And then, so basically through workshops, me and me and my sister and her friends who live in Houston, Texas, were just thinking about this castle as if what would it be like if it had been built now, and thinking about it as like a prison or a warehouse, essentially. So through workshops, we thought about ways in which power is embodied, how the technology of the building or a phone can become a technology of surveillance and control. We thought about the panoptic effect of the cell phone resulting in self-surveillance and commodification. And then essentially the video became a 2-channel installation. This red castle that you'll see in the video clip that I'll show in a minute was the castle that was actually placed in my sister's community, and then I used it as a kind of display for the video itself. And this is an installation view of this work at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Okay, so I'm going to show a clip of the 2-channel video.
Bad argument.
Some of the castle parts have arrived.
I just woke up this morning and I saw a lot of red bricks outside of my window. Archers, rafters, beams, arches, windows, and they're all in the middle of the houses.
The castle, it got built, so that's great. This is from the castle.
Oh, thank you. I'll take a look at it. You have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Adrian. I am working at the castle. I answer phones, answering questions and setting appointments for like plumbing and stuff. I like talking on the phone. It's just that I just don't like talking all day. Some people call with an attitude.
Well, since the castle here anyways, we might as well take the opportunity of the jobs they have available for us, like inventory, being a loader. You can even be a manager of the warehouse, even a security guard for the ones that's in the tower watching us. A little extra money to put in your pocket. Who don't need that?
I'm in it.
Yeah. I got my badge. It's time to start working now.
Okay, so another archive I previously entered was a shopping centre in the centre of Paris called BHV, Bazaar de Hôtel de Ville. I'm sorry, I cannot speak French, so badly pronounced. This was first built in 1870, and it was an important and significant institution in Paris at the height of the empire. I gained access to their shopping catalogue archive that was from 1890 to the present. I was interested in this being pre-Amazon, the online retailer. The archive is a history of how objects and consumer goods are presented to us through photography, images, and drawing. In fact, the drawing part was the thing that kind of really interested me the most, how these things got characterized as almost like Disney characters on that one here. I was interested in how this contributed to a French identity and a type of nationalism. For Laceratu, signs and signifiers are essential to producing a capitalist subjectivity. Late capitalism is increasingly about what he calls immaterial labor, or the work of desiring and consuming. I was interested in the archive being a history of signifiers that project certain subjectivity onto objects. BHV is located in the center of Paris, and only certain types of Parisians go there. I worked with some women who live in the suburbs of Paris, and some of them said they have never stepped foot into BHV. These women were mostly second-generation immigrants from France's old colonies, such as Guadeloupe, Algeria, and Martinique. In workshops that spanned a period of 2 years of us working together, we examined and discussed the pages of the archive. This is the only woman of color that we could find in the archive, despite the French colonial history, and she was there in order to show off the whites of the sheets. We discussed our personal experiences of being second or third generation from Africa and the colonies. The video takes these discussions and ideas that we developed in the workshop and creates a part documentary, part fictional video where the women journey through the pages of the archive, unfolding into the real streets of Paris. So this is an example of an archive page from the 60s, which shows like a assemblage of white appliances. And then so through digital imagery, it becomes a scene in the journey that the women could inhabit. The piece discusses the complex relationship between people and objects and people as objects. Okay, I'm just going to show a few small clips of this piece.
Il faut trouver une issue. C'est compliqué de trouver qui on est lorsque toutes ces choses nous parasitent.
And I'll show a few more. But later on, after reading Saidiya Hartman's Wayward Lives, I started to think about what Hartman describes as critical fabulation and how this makes sense in some ways in regards to this work. Combining fiction with reality when historical materials exclude certain voices and speak from the view of the oppressors. Art can bring these voices out, and I see this as a way of colliding time, the present with the past, and speculating on potentials. And this is another part of the video where the women are journeying through Paris with things that almost like pop out of the archive. So these are tools that were made as props.
This book.
I just wanted to say that also was part of this, because I'll show in a second how it became I think it was like a 4-channel installation. But that was Emily, and this was a thing that she wanted to do because though I don't know if anyone knows, but that was a giant Nespresso coffee machine, and they're really, really everywhere in Paris or probably in France. And it kind of, in a way, expressed a type of middle class identity. And Emily was talking about how she doesn't have that in her house, and that it was her idea to do this crump dancing, which is something that she does in France as a kind of, she said it was like a way of expressing a form of resistance through dance and through her body, and she was interested to perform crump in relation to this very normative consumer product. So that was what that was about. And then also as part of this series of works, I produced a few watercolors. And so this is the first set of watercolor. Now I'm obsessed with watercolor, but this was the first time well, that's not true, because True Red Ruin also had watercolor in it used for making of the props. But anyway, basically I made a series of watercolors. This series is called I'm Hiding in Here, and it's in I'm Hiding in Here, this one's 1921, so it's the date from when the page of the archive was from. So this is a shopping catalogue page from 1921, and basically the women that I was working with, they're each hiding in the pages of the archive. So Ingrid is hiding behind the, what do you call that? Kitchen furniture. I don't know what you call that, but yeah. And then this is the images of the video that became a 4-channel installation in 47 Canal, my gallery in New York. And so these are the digital versions from the video of these white appliances that became a standee installation. And then also this version included all these landscape elements from the archive that were painted and then blown up as standees. Because I don't know, I just thought I really was interested in how they all show this sort of very nostalgic way of describing place. And then this is another view. There was actually another room also with a monitor in it. Okay, so the last set of projects. So when I lived in Detroit for a little while, and when I was there, I got obsessed with Ford, because Ford was basically, I don't know, invented there or whatever. It was the main base. And so at the beginning of thinking about that, I got access to an archive of Ford advertisements that this guy called Jim had in his house. And he let me go over and photograph all of these, like, all print, because back then everything was print, right? So all these old adverts. And this one is a Ford advert from 1924. And I don't know, I was just really interested in them and how they depicted landscape. And maybe in part because I started to think about representation of landscape through the past previous works I had showed, Bazaar and True Red Ruin. So in these adverts, the car is often positioned in the front, and using the technique of perspective, the human is always at the center of the landscape, ready to consume it from the safety of the car. Early Ford ads were often painted, either with gouache or watercolor. I don't really know exactly what this would have, it actually looks a bit like oil. But anyway, it was, the thing that was used before photography and digital imagery was, replaced it. And I thought that was interesting because to me, painting has a closer relation to the imaginary. And I think that relates to how advertising does also, try to capture our imagination in order to sell products. And I was thinking about the collective effect of these types of representations on our imaginary and how it relates to our relationship to the natural world. So also, I was thinking about the assembly line. And so to cut a long story short, I essentially then also got to know this animation technique called the multi-plane camera that Disney used. This is an image of the Disney version. It used to be actually made from car parts, which I thought was also interesting, and it was a real big apparatus that related to the assembly line. And in fact, Disney films, because Walt Disney really respected Henry Ford and turned the whole Disney production into a type of assembly line. Anyway, so I started to think about the relationship these ads had to the assembly line, and a type of assembly line of the image or the imagination. And I decided to make my own version of a multi-plane camera, but not necessarily. The one that I did was to split up these Ford adverts into the layers that it would require to make the parallax view, to make this illusion of depth, but it was actually done in a digital form ultimately. But the original one would have been a camera that essentially mimics the Ford assembly line and splits the landscape into layers on these layers of glass, and the camera moves through the layers to create the parallax view or an illusion of depth. And Disney's Bambi, which I don't know if anyone's ever seen, but that's one of the most famous versions of this multi-plane camera use. So in effect, the representation of landscape becomes an efficient assembly line which ignores the complex ecologies and physical and social connections in landscape, right? So it's like splitting all these parts into things that could easily be extracted from. And I thought that, to me, is an interesting relationship between something that is cultural, right, and not material and affects the imagination, but perhaps has a real effect on how we do then go and extract from landscape and from the real. So the animation that I made was to talk about that. So essentially it was all of these adverts from 1924 until the present, all Ford car ads, many of them. The piece is like 18 minutes long, so I got completely carried away and obsessed with this. And it basically goes in a line, like an assembly line, and moves through the different depictions of landscape that you would have seen in these car ads, but the car is taken out. So it's a bit also maybe a slightly apocalyptic or eerie, because there's no people or no cars. It's just moving through these spaces. So let me play that. Talk over it as you watch it, because it just, I mean, I don't want to say it's boring, but it just does. This is what it does, and it continues and continues, and you move on to different landscapes. So I think you can handle other information at the same time. Okay, so after spending time in the Henry Ford archives in Dearborn in Detroit, I found a section on Fordlandia. So I'm going to talk about moving, as you watch this, I'm moving you quietly on to the next project. So Fordlandia was a camp that Henry Ford set up in the Brazilian Amazon to yield rubber for the production of tires. Workers came from all over the Amazon and would live, eat, and school and sleep at the camp. It was an extension of Ford's desire to create the ideal worker. And actually, in this animation, Workers came from all over Amazon and would live, eat, school, and sleep at the camp. It was an extension of Ford's desire to create the ideal worker, and in this case, to civilize and save the poor indigenous people. There was many failures of Fordlandia, but one was that they burnt down a part of the forest to plant rubber trees close together, as if putting rubber trees in an assembly line would yield the most rubber. But rubber trees don't do well in this condition, and it would allow bugs and blight to jump between the trees. So essentially, Fordlandia was a complete failure, and they didn't yield any rubber at all to make tires. And on a side note, Walt Disney also visited Fordlandia. So the archive was full of bureaucratic documents like this one, which showed the rational organization of the rubber plantation. The archive was from the point of view of managers. For example, this is a list of damage that occurred when the workers they went on, a riot, but I would say protest. And so there's no accounts of this happening from the workers, but just a list of the destruction that they did. So I wondered how I could think through this archive in the present. I thought about post-Fordism now and how the assembly line has exploded across the globe in various ways. Rubber was a large commodity to be extracted, like basically the biggest commodity at the time. So what's now an equivalent to rubber, and apparently it's data. So data is one of these big contemporary businesses that is really comparable to the expansion of the rubber trade. So I began researching another project in the Amazon, but this time the internet retailer, Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a company that is owned by Amazon. And it started in 2005 and is an example of a work web platform where data is extracted from humans at a massive scale. So Amazon Mechanical Turk, short for AMT, is a crowdsourcing platform that allows for the gathering of mass data from humans. Requesters post hits, human intelligence tasks, to thousands of workers at the same time to gather large amounts of human data. This data comes from humans. It's really important that it's humans because it's then used to so it comes in the forms of like questionnaires, image identifications, and all that kind of click work that maybe some of you know about. And this data that they gather is used to feed AI machine learning algorithms. And there's like workers that are situated all across the globe. So there's a lot of data that can be gathered. So I ended up working with some of these AMT workers that I connected with outside of the logic of the platform. And we then met through Zoom over, I think it was actually the span of a year and a half or something like that. And they essentially told me, reasons why they do the work, such as it was made actually during COVID, so a lot of people were doing the work because they had been laid off and that they needed to be home to do work because of COVID, but also there may be outside of COVID reasons, like due to like care responsibilities or just not being able to do the thing of having to go into a factory for some into an actual place of work for some reason. So that's one of the reasons why people use this site. So this is Mohammed Wajid, who's an AMT worker who is based in India, and this is a quote from him about the work. I work at home. During the daytime, I work in the living room, and during the evening and night times, I work lying on my bed. I just put my laptop beside me and sleep and wake up during nights just to check if there is any new work available. As of now, I don't mind sleeping on the same bed with my laptop beside me. For me, money is money and it is very important rather than total comfort. So I'm conscious that do we have a little bit more time? Okay, I'm nearly done. Sorry, lot. Okay, so you saw this watercolor before. Out of this body of work, I made a video installation, but also a series of watercolor works. And it's basically a collage of the same Ford ads that I used for the animation that I described. But also, there's always the place of work of the AMT workers. So for this one, it's a bed. And this one here, you can see the laptop in front of the burning building. And so these works are really about the production of the imaginary and the American dream that is displayed a lot of the time in these car ads. But I wanted to contrast it with the working from home. So it's like this vast adventure or landscape in comparison to being stuck at home working. And also there's something always a bit apocalyptic in a way that's happening inside of these spaces, like either like this one, the burning building, or this one, there's a dragon, which happened to actually be in one of the adverts. And this again is the bed. This is a close up, so a bed where the AMT worker is working from. Okay, so in Fordlandia, time clocks were smashed during a riot. A whistleblower who had dirt on Ford was accused of being a diamond thief to discredit him. Workers were expected to work during the hottest part of the day, and Ford insisted workers ate canned peaches instead of the abundance of foods that were found in the rainforest. And the indigenous workers were forced to learn square dancing. Many irrational decisions were made by the managers as they sought to westernize the indigenous workforce. So I'm going to show you a clip. So this is a video still of Amy, who is one of the AMT workers who re-performed. Basically, what happened in this piece, sort of similar to True Red Ruin, but all done through virtual like through Zoom, is that I sent a camera kit to each of the AMT workers, and we worked together to retell the story of Fordlandia and I sent props to them, and this actually is a digital prop that was shown on her laptop, and they learned how to shoot cameras and to do lighting and all of this different stuff to be able to produce the footage for this piece. I'm just skipping through quickly. So, and the work was installed at the Tate Britain in London. This is a video. This is an installation image. So essentially, the back image is a anamorphic projection of a type of fictional forest. So a set essentially that has all these hand painted. During COVID, I sort of got obsessed and ended up painting loads of artificial plants for this set piece. And so it's essentially a bit like an Amazon headquarters, but I use the slippage of Amazon, so it's like a forest, a Disney-like forest, and a workplace. And each screen is the AMT workers, so it's meant to seem as if they're working in this forest, but at the same time they're isolated, working from home. And there was also these you can't see that, but I'll show you another image of this in a second. Okay, so I'm going to show a clip of this piece.
So I've been working in the Amazon for going on about 1.5 years. I started primarily because I lost my job. I was laid off, and I needed a way to support my family, but I had to stay home. I had to stay home with my kids.
I've been working on the Amazon for 6 years now, and it's been working out pretty well for me, actually. I was searching and searching, trying to find work, trying to find a job in the Amazon, and I found this job, and it's actually pretty cool because I get to choose my own hours, I get to choose my own tasks. So like, if there's ever something I don't want to do, I just don't do it.
It can be thankless, can be rewarding.
Okay, and then the last clip.
By bringing back square dancing as well as other primarily Anglo-Saxon dances, we believe we may counteract the unwholesome influence of jazz on America. People will leave the dance halls and cabarets in droves to swing their partners round and round at liquor-free square dance clubs. Jazz is the cause of America's moral decay. The road to repair is as simple as replacing it with fiddles and square dances.
Circle left around the hall to that little old cabin in the lane. You're all going wrong, go back the other way to that little old cabin in the lane. Places all balance on and everybody swing to that little old cabin in the lane. To the left hand on your corner and your partner by the right, and your grand right and left half all around. First by your right hand and the next one by your left, to that little old cabin in the lane. When you meet your partner, you make your homeward flight to that little old cabin in the lane. Little old cabin in the lane. Well.
Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you.
I think that was just applause for the video, which was awesome. So to say something else.
No, I feel like that's enough. I've gone over the 50 minutes, so I'm sorry.
Thank you for a fabulous talk, and I think I need a microphone if there are no. No. Oh yeah, there we go. So thank you so much for a fabulous talk, and really richly layered and complex, and so in a way confusing and shocking work that pulls us back in so many directions. I'm sure there's some questions in the room, so if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll take a few minutes to answer them.
I think there's
there is one question there, yes. Go ahead. Looks like we're all set now. Good, yeah.
You referenced painting as that you said that it was a technology associated with creating the imaginary while looking at some fairly old car advertisements. And you talked about how that might, or does, influence the meaning of the car advertisements and what they're communicating. At least at the beginning of that archive, photography would have been a challenging medium to produce decent quality print copy in. So is there, what would your response be to the idea that painting was just didn't mean that necessarily at the time, because it simply was the technology for producing quality, colorful, good looking images, be they real or imagined?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think both things are possible. I'm sure that, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like the painting would have been more lush and more, it has more of a potential to create things that are not possible in the real. Because a lot of the time when we see adverts, they obscure is not necessarily the right word, exaggerate what's possible, right? Like it's not a documentary. The adverts are not real. They exaggerate the possibility of what this product could do, right? So to me, that's what I mean when being able to access more clearly a connection to our imagination, like, because there's something about seeing a drawing or a painting that it has a connection to something that's not possible in the real. Does that make sense to you?
Maybe today more so than at the time, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, even at the time it would have been, drawing and painting would have been able to do things that, like you said, photography couldn't do. Like photography wouldn't have been able to connect to our imagination as much at the time as something like a drawing or a painting.
What comes to mind is Albert Durer's Rhinoceros, which is a beautiful painting of a rhinoceros, or drawing actually, but he never saw one in real life. So it was a way of conveying an imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then the photography document comes later. So another question, please raise your hand. Yes, Valencia, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for that amazing talk. As an artist who's very interested in collaboration, even remote collaboration and community in the creation of new work that is, talking critically about the lived experiences of the people that you are collaborating with. I'm just curious about the process of, first reaching out to, say, the Amazon Mechanical Turk workers, and how did you establish the trust and that kind of relationship that you could do what you did in the end. I think it's just it's amazing what you're able to achieve, and that at a distance, I'm just in awe. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I think that time is really important, and actually I am working on a project now that I had to request for more time because I couldn't make the meaningful connections within the timeline that I had. And so that's actually another reason why I have multiple different ways of working, because if I have a tight deadline, it would not work to work with people, because I do believe that, it's about keeping connections. It also needs a really good budget, because you can't expect, making each meeting needs, the person that I'm working with needs to be paid for, but then there needs to be a lot of those times to be able to make a good connection. I think that it, and also, I mean, sometimes it's stressful because, you can't make people do, not that I ever would, but, sometimes people don't want to work on it anymore. And they say, I can't because of some reasons. And then you have to be okay with that. It's just, it's not, it's very rewarding, because I don't know why, but I really like working with people. I've always really, enjoyed, it just, it's just so much more exciting, but it can be more of a challenge. Yeah, so there isn't a very straightforward solution. It's just, for me, the main thing is time and communication. And being open, because I usually, that's the thing about also having archival material, is that that's the source of discussion, but I don't force what the result is going to be. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? While we're waiting, maybe, did you have one, Shannon? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you again for an incredible talk, which was really well positioned in this semester. And I hope it's all right if I ask you something that's going to situate this inside of our course.
Yeah,
and I know you're a teacher, so, and apologize too that it might make you repeat things you said, but I just want to hear them under our frames. So we're closing, getting to the end of the semester, and we've had 3 units that we use to organize this exploration of video and media art. The first one was called Video Across the Arts, which is its relation to everything else: sculpture, sound, performance, cinema, watercolor. The second was called Video as Social Intervention, which thematized everything as social intervention, but really thematized people who, are working on social issues in somewhat more, perhaps abstractly, but also explicitly. And you're in a unit called Circulation, where ostensibly we're thinking about the back end, actually, the back end of video art, its economies, its technologies, its reception systems, and all of that, which seems to me you're so perfectly positioned because that is the content that you engage, that circulation is a social and political question. So I wanted to hear you say something back to our 3 categories, if you could, or at least anything more about what you would say of at least making circulation the object of an aesthetic and almost activist, at least socially engaged practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A lot.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, let me find one way to get into that. As you said, I'm interested in it as the content of the work, because I think it started because I moved. I was born in America, but I didn't stay here for very long. My mum brought me back to where she is from, in a small town in England called Hempstead, when I was 18 months old. So I'm not necessarily, I didn't grow up in America. I grew up in England. And so when I was in my late 20s, I decided to move back to America to study. And that was like a moment of whoa to me, because I don't think I realized how much both the context that you're in frames a lot to do with who you are, but also how much actually things are circulating. Both things were true, that I was very British and very in relation to my context, but there were so many things that also I saw that, circulated, like consumer goods that come from America or are linking those 2 places. And so I think that's how I started to be interested in circulation, both, and I also worked in advertising for a little while before moving back to do my master's in art, and so that also was on my mind, how certain decisions I was making because I was an art director, and that things that I was coming up with, ideas, would circulate around the world, and that might have an effect on people. So circulation in terms of colonialism, actually, or those things are different, but I was thinking about how some sort of way of looking at the world, be it a kind of capitalist way of looking at things, can circulate and influence people around the world. So that's in terms of maybe the ideas. And then materially, video can circulate pretty easily, because you can show it in any different forms. I liked that. because I studied sculpture, and I made these large, big sculptures, and then after the show, I didn't know what to do with them. So that's how I got into video. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
So we're going to end with one last question, which is, it makes me wonder if there's any alternatives to circulation that we need to consider. Because when I looked at that coffee crumb dance, I was like, gee, I feel like having a coffee right now. And so in a way, it operated against advertising, but it also kind of operated as advertising. And it made me think about, Nestle and their global reach and how they extract resources from all around the world and circulate them. So is there, in addition to complicating circulation, is there maybe another step we could consider artistically or strategically to push against circulation and say, no, we need to do something different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for me, I am a walking contradiction, and that a lot of people are, and I sit in the complexity of that. So it put another way, yes, my work does circulate, and I like that, and I want that to happen. And I just feel like I'm constantly trying to think of ways of making work that acknowledges and tries to deal with the bad things about capitalism, but at the same time, I don't want to celebrate it, but we live in it and we can't escape it. And so nor can I. And I am very much a part of that complex, because it's very psychological. I was just thinking, it's like for example, I love Nike sneakers, so that's a contradiction. Like, I'm critiquing them, but at the same time, I'm also really like wearing, I haven't been wearing them recently, but I enjoy the aesthetics of shoes, and I know a lot of people do, so it's not necessarily a straightforward thing. But I think that there is something about fighting for better workers' rights that maybe cuts through a lot of the so it's like you could still have Nike sneakers with people who have better I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Swearing in an educational place. For better work rights or better conditions and labor relations. I believe that is possible, and that there is a lot of things that get obscured. Like, you don't know when you buy these things how, like, the conditions of the people, like the bad conditions or the oppression that has to happen in order for certain people to have a lot of wealth as well. Like, I think that there's a lot of redistribution that could happen. And so I don't know, in terms of the circulation thing, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that perhaps I'm not the one to answer that question, actually, because I'm already a circulated being, incredibly. I don't really feel as if I even have like an indigeneity as such. Like, I have to relearn, because my dad's Nigerian, but I have to learn my cultural relationship to that. So put another way, in terms of opposite of circulation, is there a way back to an indigeneity or an indigenous, I think that it's more speculative as well now. There's a complexity to that. We may have to reconsider what it means to be indigenous.
Or reimagine it, maybe. Thank you so much for that beautiful, wonderful answer, and for a wonderful talk. And thanks everybody for coming out today. Let's give Danielle Dean another round of applause.